Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency, here with an up-to-date 2050 climate forecast for all of our friends in Florida. So, seriously, everyone grab your hats. This is going to be a wild ride. If you want to dig in and build resilience in Florida, I'm going to get you the best information I can, and I'm rooting for you. And if you're considering moving to Florida, maybe watch this and then check out my Georgia video because I bet you want the old Florida. Let's check out the new Florida. Let's get rolling. Just so you know where to find my source material. This outlook is based on information from the Fifth National Climate Assessment. If you want to follow along with me, if you want to look at the figures yourself, because you can zoom in on them, you can get really fine-grained resolution on information right where you live. You're going to want to go to chapters and down to all figures. I'll say the number of the figure as I'm going to explore it with you. So you can see they're all here in numeric order. You'll be able to find what you need. I use the Fifth National Climate Assessment because it represents the highest consensus climate science available. Your tax dollars paid for the development and review of that document, and you deserve access to the information in there. Today, we're breaking down the NCA 5 for Florida. Just so you know, American Resiliency is the only nonprofit focused on communicating this important information to the public. There's a congressional mandate that they actually don't fund communications for this information at the federal level. We run on your donations. Okay, so you know, the conditions I'm modeling for 2050, we're talking about regularly hitting 2C as a global temp increase. That seems like our most likely climate future. Even if we can stay on target for emissions reductions, choose the best we're likely to get, we're going to be dealing with change. We're not going to be dealing with a future that is business as usual. So let's look at changes for 2C on the national overview, figure 1.14. So you can see here that Florida's mostly down in this lightest color, in this lowest change band of the US. In the NCA 5, we're now talking about an average annual warm up in the southeast around 3 to 4 degrees by 2050. That sounds fine, right? From this figure, you'd think Florida would be good. And I do have a number of pretty bullish outlooks for the southeast. However, as we look into this, you're going to see that this figure, the feds have average changed over the region, and for Florida, an average may not have been the best statistical measure to use. Now we're looking at figure 2.11. I want us to focus in on hot days. I want us to look and notice that for Florida, they appear to have made a special color for you. That is always a bad sign. Let's zoom in. Okay, this increase in days over 95, we see this special dark color isn't everywhere. The panhandle near the coast, you're looking at a smaller increase in super hot days. That increase also looks smaller by the Keys and along the Atlantic coast. In our previous outlook for Florida, we also noticed this, that there's relatively smaller risks on many factors along the Atlantic side of the peninsula. But all this dark, dark red, all of that is expected to get more than 50 additional days over 95 degrees. Let's double check on this with a regional map. All right, so here's figure 22.9, a regional map with higher resolution, a little bit easier to see. Also looking at additional number of days over 95. We can see here it is looking very hot in some of Florida's fortunately less populated regions. But even in like Miami, even over here by Tampa, you're still talking about a lot of additional days over 95, 30, 40 additional days over 95. Florida is getting really hot. All right, back to figure 2.11. Let's look at something less extreme. Here we're checking out your change in cold days, your change in number of days under 32. You know, Florida doesn't go below freezing a lot, but it's kind of so close to the limit that it really impacts what sort of hardiness you can grow in terms of citrus, in terms of tropical plants. There's a lot of stuff you can grow right down at the tip of Florida right now that you couldn't grow further up in the state because of the occasional days freezing. You can see here you're looking at as much as 10, 15 days, fewer cold days on the panhandle and going down into the peninsula. Let's look at that through the lens of plant hardiness zones. Let's see if this is really going to change the sort of plants you can grow. All right, now we're looking at figure 11.3. Let's see changes in plant hardiness zones. Also, it's an enormous figure that no person could just look at normally and pull information out of. So let's break it down a little bit. So looking at Florida today with pretty contemporary information, we see these shades of red. And those reds are going to be 9B, 10A, 10B, and 11A as we start to get to sort of a bruised color. we can see that that 11A territory and 10B territory, which are more of a true tropical flavor winter, where it really never gets very cold. You can grow tropical plants, tropical fruits there. We do see that down as we approach the Keys. There are people who grow mango in South Florida today. And if we look at the mid-century projection, we can see that those tropical conditions are moving up the peninsula quite a bit. We see it coming all the way out into these beach communities along the Atlantic side. So that's going to be an agricultural transformation. I don't know that it's necessarily a thing that we should think of as negative, though, this increase in tropical type winters. Because if you look at the global overview, you see that many of the tropical areas where we get tropical imports today are much more threatened than most of the United States. So being able to have some level of domestic tropical fruit production seems potentially appealing. It seems like a potential opportunity to go alongside these challenges Florida is facing. Let's keep talking about potential agricultural and landscape changes. We take one look back at figure 2.11. I want to look at this change in nights over 70. You can see that there's a big increase in your nights over 70 projected for Florida and for the Southeast as a whole. This is a big challenge for the region as a whole. As you get nights over 70, that makes it harder for people to cool down from heat stress during the day, and it makes it harder for many temperate adapted plants to grow. A lot of them do their growing in the cool night. So you can see some really strong indications with 4 to 6 weeks of additional warm nights by 2050 in Florida that we need to move in Florida towards a tropical type landscape, away from anything that might resemble a temperate type landscape. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about water. Let's see if we'd have what we need to grow some cool stuff. I'm going to take a minute to talk about precipitation changes, and then we'll look to the coast and get an eye on sea level rise. All right, we're looking at figure 210. We can see that at 2C, Florida is actually modeled to move into some pretty significant precipitation changes. There's a mild drought trend emerging near the southern part of the peninsula, whereas up the panhandle with these cross-hashed lines, that means it's statistically significant in the modeling, maybe 5% more precipitation. Looks so far as we layer all of the information together, like our most stable part of the peninsula is this area here, kind of by Daytona on the Atlantic side. Let's see if that holds as we keep moving through the outlook. When we're talking about precipitation, it's always nice to look at more than one model. I'm also going to show you here in figure 4.3 from chapter 4 is really cool, this chapter on water. If we can get some more insight as to where we expect that drought trend, and let's zoom in here. It looks like it's projected to be strongest towards the tip of the peninsula, that we do expect to see relatively lower change, a smaller increase in precipitation here on the Atlantic side, and that most of the increased rain is going to be falling sort of in the shadow of the Gulf here. So in warming conditions, a little more precipitation is a good thing. Plants need more water to grow in warmer conditions, but we all know you can have too much of a good thing, right? These deluge type rains that cause urban flooding, they're a real problem. We can get a little window into what to expect as we move towards 2050 if we look at increased precipitation trends in figure 212. Let's take a check. All right, this figure changes to precipitation extremes at 2C. This allows us to look at a variety of models for total precipitation on heaviest 1% of days, your 5-year maximum daily precipitation, so that's like your big storms, and your annual maximum daily precipitation. If we see the map lighting up on all three of these, you know that you're in an area that should prepare for like super deluge. But we don't see that tight of a pattern in Florida. We're going to zoom in on the 5-year max. So where are your biggest storms of the decade projected? Looks like Lake Okeechobee is going to be a hot spot for high intensity precipitation events, and that we see a stronger signal this time coming from the Atlantic than from the Gulf side, which if you're in Tampa, this probably looks like good news. When we talk about storms in Florida, when you talk about big precipitation in Florida, of course, you're going to think about hurricanes. So NOAA has gone back and forth on this. This is an area of active research, but there aren't projected to be a whole lot more hurricanes in the world at 2C. We're talking about having slightly fewer hurricanes, actually, but the ones that we get will be crazier. They'll have stronger winds, they'll dump more rain. We're talking about a hurricane more normally becoming like a Cat 4 instead of fading out into a tropical storm. So that sucks. I wish that I could give you updated path projections, but we don't have any for the NCA 5. When we look back to historical projections, which again, it's an active area of research, a lot of it is changing. Hurricane Ian, which took that unusual track over Big Bend in 2023, that pathway is projected to become more typical, and we do expect more action in the Gulf, where the Keys and the very southern tip of Florida would be more likely to get hit. I think it's worth remembering, though, as we think about this sort of poor consensus research area where we don't have a lot of great assurance to give, we don't have super clear projections about the future. We need to remember what happened to Acapulco. So that storm, that rapid intensification, it came out of nowhere. People had no time to get out, no time to adequately prepare for a Cat 5 hit. In 2023, that scary warm water off the coast of Florida means that we could be vulnerable to that same kind of rapid intensification. These big, out of nowhere major storms. It's a serious risk. And speaking about serious risks, it's time to look at sea level rise. Let's rip off the band aid. Here in figure 9.2, you can see that by 2050, Florida is projected to see 1 to 2 feet of sea level rise. I gotta tell you, all the scientific evidence, especially from 2023, is coming in that we need to shoot high. So we're definitely gonna model 2 feet for the entire coast of Florida this video. This is known as Sea Level Rise Viewer. It's an excellent tool. The link's in the video description. You could look at your house or your friend's house or your favorite city. The ability to zoom in is very good. Let's look at the overview at 2 feet. You can see some real changes, some real land loss, particularly down here. There was some serious land loss. I think it's worth noting, though, that this is not like those pictures that people use to scare you, where like Florida is gone. The whole thing is wiped away. That's not what we're expecting by 2050. We need to know what sort of threats we really have to prepare for. And I'm going to look at one of the things that is the saddest at first. We're going to go and look down at the Keys. So here's the Keys today at the current mean higher high water mark. Looking at 250, we see substantial inundation of developed areas, and we see a big increase in marshiness, big increase in high tide flooding. This is really sad to see. It should be sad to see for all Americans. These are special places. And throughout the Keys, we see similar levels of damage. You can see tremendous land loss at 2 feet around Sugarloaf. These are precious biological areas, very rare species. It's sad news, and throughout the Keys, it looks super challenging, with wildlife areas being impacted first and worst. Looking up the coast a little bit, let's check out Miami. From a bird's eye view, you can see that overall the damage is going to be greater. The direct impacts are going to be much more substantial for Miami Beach than for Miami itself. But I think it's worth pointing out. So going back to today, look at this area. Look at how much marshiness emerges inland. And this is a real concern to talk about with sea level rise. When we think about sea level rise, we think about like a condo falling over because its foundations got damaged by seawater. It's important to also think about the fact that salt water can get into the groundwater and can get into the soil. And these sort of projections that we see as we look at Florida, where we notice changes to the water table pretty far inland, should be very concerning. You need to think about, where are you getting your water from? Is it safe from salt water? And do you need to consider adding desalination capacity to your municipality? Zooming out on the Atlantic coast with an eye to those inland changes, once you get north of Pompano Beach, you can see that the risk of saltwater incursion appears to drop significantly. And let's look at something else that's relatively hopeful. Looking up on that Atlantic side, looking around Daytona, which it looked like you all were going to get some more intense rains, but otherwise conditions looked relatively less change, relatively milder change than much of the state. We can see that the damage to Daytona Beach shores, to your beaches, to your city are much less extreme than, say, Miami. And Miami, it's not like the whole city is going beneath the waves, right? But let's check this out, because you have an awesome beach here, right? We can see that unlike some parts of the US, we are expecting to see some loss of the beach, but that there is not terrible beach preservation. There's still going to be plenty of beach to save, to preserve, to protect, and to enjoy up on that North Atlantic coast. Let's look over by the Gulf. Let's check out Tampa. So do a big picture here. We can see change, right? But we don't see that level of like severe inland change. We don't see that severe inland marshiness that's going to really threaten your water supply. And looking down here over by Petersburg, Clearwater, where we have a lot of just really wonderful beaches, really wonderful habitat, we can see habitat issues, right? Issues in places that were important for wild animals, for bird populations. They're losing the land, but we see again potential for really excellent beach preservation, even out in these delicate keys out by Tampa. When we think about sea level rise in Florida, it can be easy to think it's over. We don't need to think about conservation. For everyone who loves these landscapes, this is good news. There is landscape that can be protected here. There's beach that can be protected. And zooming in on this like dense housing stock here in Tampa, I feel like this is important to see. Look at the relatively extremely small proportion of housing stock that is going to be impacted by direct inundation from sea level rise. You should imagine a future here where you have a real future. One more area I want to check out Crystal River and Homosassa Springs because you know I'm like a bird nut, right? Like a wildlife person. These are some extremely important preserves, and we can see that at 2 feet, they're expected to face really dramatic land loss. This, of course, is going to have big impacts for the people who live in the area. I think that it's really crucial if you have an eye on conservation to know which areas you can target for preservation at 2 feet or more of sea level rise. They're especially important to get protections in place. Shifting gears a little bit, we're looking at your increased flooding costs in Florida. It might shock you. Regionally, they're very high. That's rough, folks. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to have to bring you such bad news, but you need to know what's coming if you want to prepare, right? And I have to tell you about one other big threat because you can't prepare if you don't know. We need to talk about fire. All right, looking at 7.4, which is a confusing figure. We want to look just at this side here, the change in number of days expressed helpfully as a percentage. We can see there's a little bit of a projected decrease in wildfire risk to the Everglades, which I see as surprising when we look at the drought trend really centering down on the south of Florida there. What can you do though? I'm just reading you the map, right? As we look though, this is concerning, where throughout much of the peninsula and into the panhandle, we expect about a 200% increase in fire danger. So this means maybe 1 year in 5, by 2050, the conditions would be right for major wildfire in Florida. This is a serious emerging threat for the state. That increased risk for wildfire is going to come at the hot part of the year. So imagine it's hot like last year, like 2023. You're on the beach, but the water is hot like a bath. You've got the stinky sargasso mats coming in, bad algal blooms, and now there's also smoke from a big wildfire by Okeechobee. Mare, right? I look at that probability. It is probable that all of those things will come together. And I don't want to think about moving to Florida, but it appears that other people do not think that way. I think this is interesting. You can see here in 22.1 that the feds are projecting that people are going to continue to move to Florida in large numbers. That seems weird for me. I can see it, of course, for Florida's historic climate, but that old Florida is going to be now located in southern and coastal Georgia. Keep an eye on Georgia if you want to see some potential for healthy growth, man. This new Florida, it doesn't strike me as a retirement destination. It seems to me more like a place for people who are serious. I wouldn't want to be in conditions like that unless I was serious about my relationship with the land and serious about getting ready. People who are ready to deal with challenges related to drinking water availability and to serious heat are the people who belong in Florida at 2050. Dangerous heat, serious heat that's not familiar to the region, and we need people there who are serious about the work of landscape transformation and coastal transformation. Let's talk about the transformation. Let's talk about costs. So here we are in figure 22.17. Even if we get going now, the energy transformation in Florida looks really expensive. Adapting the electrical infrastructure to these projected energy needs under this enormously increased heat It's easily the most expensive energy transformation in the region, regardless of proactive adaptation, regardless of building resilience and getting ready. It's like super expensive. This is figure 22.19, looking at projected change in agricultural outputs. The conditions coming to Florida are so different, so unlike other conditions we've experienced in the US, that the feds are simply not modeling much of the state in terms of the agricultural transformation because we don't have the data. We don't have the domestic experience on how to do ag under these conditions. And these concerns about what saltwater incursion is going to do to the soil in some of that southern half of the state is very serious. This is the last figure I'm going to show you. This is 22.6, where we see a vision of transformation. This is the picture they show in the NCA 5 near the text where they talk about how everyone wants to move to coastal Florida. So these are the new urban developments we need. And this picture is pretty. You can see people here are going to do everything for themselves. The community will lead this development. The community will provide its own disaster assistance. The community is going to build these very pretty buildings with green roofs and green walls, with great urban tree cover, with many other nature-based solutions. Folks, you know I always do my best to be honest with you. When I was reading through all the material in the Southeast section, I saw this figure for the first time in that context, and it made me want to cry. It's a lovely vision for the future, but I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't believe anyone's going to pay for this. And I don't believe that the people of Florida have the wealth and the power to drive this change on their own. And that's what community led development means. And that's what's written right on the picture is that this vision is based on community led development. I'd love to be wrong. I would love it if these projections for Florida are wrong and I look really stupid when I'm an old lady. But when I envision the future for coastal Florida in these areas more vulnerable to sea level rise, I'm afraid I see a vision of a lot more condos leaning over on each other, a lot more damage where there's no money to clean up, and an electrical grid that maybe can't handle these projected changes in demand. I know some of you out there are listening who are serious Florida people, who don't want more people moving there to treat your state like a playground, who care about continuing your family's generational life in Florida, who are based in Florida. If there's one real hope in this outlook, you all might be the ones to see it because these conditions look likely to clear out the folks who are there to party, right? For folks who are serious, there are resilient solutions that are more achievable, more in your hands than that pretty vision we see in 22.6. You're in a good environment for air to water filtration systems. The desalination technology has really picked up and become more modular over the last 10 years. And power independence is more achievable today than it has ever been before. And we keep moving in that direction. Traditionally, Floridians have been pretty agile, pretty mobile across their landscape and able to chill out and wait for an opportunity. Crazy if that's what it takes. And those are the skills that'll serve Floridians well over the next 20 years. I'm wishing you all the best, and I'm sorry that your beautiful state has such a rough outlook. But there is hope, and it is possible to prepare for what's coming. You got to place your bets, Florida. If you don't like this outlook, now's the time to get out before you lose the value in your home. If you're staying put, now's the time to get ready. Folks, thanks for listening, and I'd also like to thank all of the donors and volunteers who contribute to American Resiliency. If you are interested in giving, please check out the donation link on our About page on the YouTube channel or go to our website, www.americanresiliency.org. We are a registered 501c3. If you send us direct donations, they are tax deductible. Thanks to the generosity of this community in both funding and time, we've really been able to step up the quality of our videos for these updated forecasts. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for being here with me. Let's get ready together.